When you can't tell the difference between planning for war and wanting one, that's when empire becomes habit. And what we saw in that exchange was exactly that habit, the military reflex to imagine conflict everywhere, even where none exists.
Recognize the ranking member.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Just on the budget point, I made this point before the committee before. The House just passed a budget that adds nearly $3 trillion to an already out-of-control debt. So if we do really want to spend money on defense or anywhere else, we ought to be willing to pay for it. And this, certainly go back through generations of, bipartisan problems with this. You can't have a debt that size and keep coming back talking about how much money you're going to spend, whether it's defense or whatever your priorities are. And Mr. Secretary, you said the 99% down on border crossings and the border is secure. At the same time, we're going to take $1 billion out of the MILCON budget, out of building barracks, to send it for the border, and there's another 4,000 troops that we're planning on sending down to the border. Given that the border is secure, might you rethink that spending?
Well, sir, we are securing it. It is secure, but it's a manpower-intensive effort at the beginning.
Two different words there. It's either secure or secure, and it sounded to me like you said it was secure.
It is secure.
Okay.
What we're continuing to do is expand that and fortify it through infrastructure, which is a big part of the budget on the Department of Homeland Security side as well. So that $1 billion you're talking about was from the CR in FY25. We fully fund that back and more in FY26 with a recognition that we were dealing with the world as it existed when we came in. And the previous administration said they needed new legislation to secure the border. It turns out you just needed a new president.
I would point out
president
that
with
you
the
have not
Defense Department and
submitted,
DHS that was willing to go to the border
you
and actually
have
secure it, which is what we
not submitted a budget yet. So whether or not you're putting that money back in remains to be seen. You have definitely taken it out. And I think the obsession there, and I don't disagree, the border needed to be secure. But from a pure budget standpoint, let's just not keep the political focus on that. Let's make sure that we're funding some of the other priorities that we have. So when it comes back to acquisition reform and the chairman's point, it's our committee, certainly Congress is part of the problem. We set up a lot of requirements. Defense contractors are part of the problem. I'm curious, how would you get after reforming the culture at the Pentagon so that you can move faster, number one, and number two, how would you get after the defense contractors that push the requirements process? And specifically, what would you do about the requirements process to try to speed things up?
Well, first of all, I think gold plating is a real problem, sir. I mean, across the department.
Interesting to use the word gold in this particular context, but yes, I agree with you, actually.
We maybe could use a little bit more silver plating on occasion. A recognition that the 99% solution is oftentimes the enemy of the 85% solution that delivers 2 years sooner. And that's contractors and other companies wanting to do right, but trying to do too much and overpromise, and then they're under-delivering, and the warfighter
not always wanting to do right. In some cases, just wanting to make money,
so,
but yes.
The change is also in acquisitions about people. You need reformers in these positions. I'm here to be a disruptor of those processes. Our deputy secretary has extensive business experience. The types of people we're bringing in as undersecretaries have been disruptors and innovators in the private sector who recognize that bureaucracy can be dysfunctional and needs to be disrupted. So it's taking outside-the-box unique approaches. I mean, virtual design is a big example. How many times are we going to build something physically that takes a year to build when you could use AI and computing power, design it virtually, identify the flaws, and move more quickly, or create open architecture so you can move.
Our committee stands ready to work with you.
I mean, there's 500 different things we can do, and we're doing them.
Yeah, and I'm sincerely concerned about this. Is it the policy of the Department of Defense that we need to be prepared to take Greenland and Panama by force if necessary? Is this a policy that you have within the Department of Defense in accordance with the President's wishes?
I heard what you said about those two countries and saying we need to worry about China. Well, we are worried about China.
That wasn't my concern.
China's malign influence in Panama.
I was concerned with us
China has
saying
control
that
of
using military force to take another sovereign
Panama,
country's territory.
we should pay attention to that.
Right.
So Panama is very key terrain that we've focused on, and we've been willing to focus
so we
on,
should
as
take it,
is Greenland.
We should take it by military force. They're important. I'm not going to argue with that.
The Arctic is
I'm
incredibly
arguing with
important.
using our military to take it by force.
Our job at the DoD is to have plans. And
Do you have a plan for that?
Our job at the Defense Department is to have plans for any particular contingency.
Including the contingency of basically invading
Any contingency
Denmark.
you need, we've got it. We've got a building full of planners, and we're prepared to give recommendations whenever needed.
So just be clear, you have plans to take Panama and Greenland by force if necessary.
I think the American people would want the Pentagon to have plans for any particular contingency.
Not
and
for that
thankfully,
one,
we
in
are
my
in the
opinion.
planning business.
Speaking on behalf of the American people, I don't think the American people voted for President Trump because they were hoping we would invade Greenland. I'm going to go out on a limb on that one. I yield back.
When Congressman Adam Smith asked Secretary Pete Hegseth whether the Pentagon had a plan to invade Greenland or Panama, it sounded absurd, almost satirical. But what made that moment powerful wasn't the question itself, it was the way Hegseth responded. Because instead of dismissing it, instead of saying, "Of course not," he leaned on a bureaucratic shield. The Department of Defense has plans for every contingency. That phrase, plans for every contingency, may sound innocuous, even responsible. After all, planning is what the Pentagon does. But in that phrase hides a mindset, one that defines American power and the machinery behind it. The idea that every possibility, even the seizure of another nation's territory, should be cataloged, planned, simulated, and readied for execution if necessary. This is not new. Throughout history, the Pentagon has maintained contingency plans for almost every geopolitical scenario you can imagine. Invasions, coups, rapid deployments, covert destabilizations. That's part of its DNA. But what's concerning is how this language is being reintroduced, not as a defensive posture, but under a political leadership that sees the military less as a stabilizing institution and more as a tool of domestic and global leverage. When Hegseth refuses to rule out the possibility of invading a sovereign nation, even hypothetically, he is signaling something profound, a willingness to conflate preparedness with permission. And that's where democratic oversight must step in. Because when planning quietly becomes policy, and policy becomes normalized through repetition, what you end up with is a defense establishment that starts believing that its capabilities justify its actions. Adam Smith understood that danger. His question was surgical, not a joke, not sarcasm. He was exposing the logic of empire that often hides behind technical jargon. Do you have a plan to invade Greenland or Panama? Is another way of asking, do you understand the limits of your power? Do you know where defense ends and aggression begins? And here's why this moment matters to every American watching. The Defense Department is one of the most powerful bureaucracies in human history. It commands trillions of dollars, millions of employees, and global reach that stretches across oceans and continents. Yet, in that hearing, what we saw was a lack of moral and democratic humility. The assumption that planning is enough, that we have plans for everything, somehow substitutes for accountability. Think about the historical parallels. In the early 20th century, great powers had contingency plans too. Plans that were supposed to deter war, but instead made war inevitable once a spark appeared. The First World War was born out of contingency planning. The Cold War's hair-trigger nuclear postures were justified as readiness. When power systems build endless scenarios for domination or defense, they eventually create the conditions for their own justification. And that's what Congressman Smith was warning against. Not just the absurdity of invading Greenland, but the casual acceptance of militarized solutions to political questions. Greenland and Panama are not abstract names on a map. They are sovereign entities, homes to people with histories and autonomy. The idea that the Pentagon could plan their seizure as just another logistical exercise tells us something chilling about how some in Washington still think about global order, as a chessboard, not a community. But this exchange also reveals something about domestic politics. Remember, earlier in that hearing, Smith confronted Hegseth about diverting military construction funds, money meant to build housing and barracks for service members, to fund the southern border, even as Hegseth insisted the border was secure. That's not just hypocrisy. That's militarization turned inward. It's a government using the symbols and resources of defense to score political points at home. And when you connect those two threads, the external impulse to dominate and the internal impulse to militarize, you see a single pattern: the erosion of democratic oversight under the banner of security. In real terms, what does that mean for the public? It means fewer resources for actual defense readiness and more for political theater. It means soldiers' living conditions sacrificed for border optics. It means a defense culture that rewards performative strength over strategic wisdom. And it means that, slowly, the Pentagon becomes less a guardian of the nation and more a political instrument in the hands of whoever controls the narrative. Adam Smith's final words in that exchange, "I don't think the American people voted for an invasion of Greenland," cut through all of that with plain moral clarity. It's a reminder that in a democracy, military power must remain subordinate to civilian judgment, and civilian judgment must always be accountable to truth and reason, not to fear or fantasy. Because when officials treat contingency plans like blank checks, what they are really doing is erasing the line between defense and offense. And when that line disappears, history tells us the cost is always borne by ordinary people. Soldiers sent to fight in places they never should have been, civilians caught in wars that didn't need to happen, and nations destabilized in the name of preparedness. So this isn't just about Greenland or Panama. It's about what kind of country the United States chooses to be. One that plans for every possible war, or one that invests that same intelligence and energy into preventing them. If the Pentagon is truly in the planning business, then the public's job and Congress's duty is to stay in the accountability business. Plans must be questioned, motives must be interrogated, and every scenario on a classified desk should face one simple test: does it serve peace or does it serve power? That's the deeper story Adam Smith was trying to tell, and it's the one that rarely gets airtime. That freedom, in its truest form, depends not on the number of contingency plans we have, but on how we use them and who we allow to control them. If you want more breakdowns that challenge power, reveal the machinery behind it, and teach you what's really at stake, not just what's being said, make sure to like, share, and subscribe to Left Lens, because understanding power is the first step to holding it accountable.